is why are chemical weapons still being used at all when Russia was the framework guarantor of removing all the chemical weapons? And so working with our allies and partners from NATO to Qatar and elsewhere, we are going to address this issue.
Can you rule out taking action, launching airstrikes against Assad, Mr. Secretary?
I don't rule out anything right now.
Brand new reaction from Defense Secretary James Mattis on the suspected chemical attack in Syria. The Pentagon chief referring to a deal former President Obama made with Russia that was supposed to rid Syria of chemical weapons. Now the viability of that deal coming under even more scrutiny after the Syrian president is accused of carrying out another chemical attack, killing dozens of people, women and children. Joining me now is the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mac Thornberry. Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining us this morning as we try to learn more about what exactly happened. What new information can you give us this morning?
Well, of course, there are press reports of some sort of strike in just a few hours ago in Syria, but I don't think we can assume that that was related to the chemical weapons attack. Syria is a cauldron of security concerns for all sorts of countries, and somebody may have taken this opportunity to take advantage of it for their own interests, not necessarily related to the chemical attack.
The president has said that they should pay a price. What sort of action, as you just heard the defense secretary, he's not ruling out anything at this point. What sort of action is and should be considered on our part?
Well, remember, this happened about a year ago, where about 100 people were killed with a chemical attack. The president responded with a targeted strike against those Syrian military units that carried out the attack. I thought that made very good sense, and it seems to me we ought to consider doing it again with our allies. Because as Secretary Mattis was just pointing out, we have the Russians not only propping up Assad and their use of chemical weapons, but the Russians are using chemical weapons for targeted assassination like they did or tried in Britain a few weeks ago. So it is really important for our allies like Britain and France to stand with us and show that these guys cannot get away with these atrocities.
How should we deal with Assad?
Let me be clear, we cannot fix Syria, but we have to make sure that ISIS does not get a foothold there, and we have to work with our allies to try to keep a lid on things, or else we may get sucked into some wider conflict. And it is by being there that the U.S. gets some leverage. So I am concerned about some notions that the U.S. would just leave Syria, because when we leave, it creates a vacuum, and there's nothing but bad guys there who will fill that vacuum if the U.S. leaves.
The president blames his predecessor, President Obama, for not doing more while he was in office, and he tweeted this out. If President Obama had crossed his stated red line in the sand, the Syrian disaster would have ended long ago. Animal Assad would have been history. Were there missed opportunities, Chairman, that led us to this point?
Oh, absolutely. And the president is exactly right. One of the biggest mistakes of the Obama years was to draw a red line in Syria and then not follow up and do anything about it. That told Assad and Putin and everybody else that you don't have to pay attention to what the United States says. We're just a paper tiger. And so after that, Syria has spiraled into this terrible mess which President Trump inherited. Again, it's not up to the United States to fix Syria, but we've got to be there and to make sure that we're not attacked by terrorists from there, and that we kind of keep the lid on things so we don't get sucked into a wider war in the Middle East.
As you mentioned, whether it's Russia, Iran, North Korea, the world is watching. What is our message in response to this action over the weekend?
Well, I think, number one, condemnation along with our allies. I think it's a good thing that Ambassador Haley's going to the UN Security Council, so it's a full court press against these sort of atrocities. But you know what an even stronger message is the budget bill that we passed a couple weeks ago to fully fund, for the first time in years, our military. That's what we do speaks much more clearly than what we say. And to show Putin and Assad and everybody else that we're going to stand up and defend ourselves, putting the resources behind our military, is the strongest message that we can possibly send.
Should we consider new airstrikes?
Absolutely. Especially, as I say, against those units that were responsible for these chemical attacks. But we should do so with allies to make it an international condemnation of using chemical weapons, which are outlawed, by the way, and which Russia has promised to uphold.
I want to ask you about the topic of military readiness, because this is turning out to be an incredibly serious situation with the death toll, Chairman, now rising for aviation crashes. 133 troops have been killed in 5 years. In the last 3 weeks alone, 6 military plane crashes have killed 16. The Pentagon reacted to this last week, saying it's not at crisis levels yet. Do you think it is? And what's causing this rise, Chairman?
It is definitely a crisis, and it does not help anyone to stick your head in the sand and wish this crisis away. And I want to say Fox News has been on this story for the last 2 years, leading all other media outlets in talking about pilots that had to borrow parts off of museum planes just to keep their operational aircraft going, and other readiness problems that have been mounting. So what happened was we cut the defense budget by 20% over the last 8 years, and that 20%, and the world did not get 20% safer, by the way. So those cuts have had a deep, lasting effect on our military, including training, maintenance of our planes and ships, and a number of personnel-related items. So on March 22nd, Congress passed a bill to begin to turn it around. A lot of people think it was too much money, and it was more money than I would have spent on some domestic programs. But the key is we've got to do whatever it takes to have planes that fly and have training that is appropriate for a very dangerous world.
And the best for our men and women that serve. Chairman Mac Thornberry, thank you for joining us as we await still further response from the White House on the situation in Syria this morning. We thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am.